Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the podcast, where we go over an array of Christian books, stories, songs, and sermons in order to enjoy, be encouraged, and long for another world. This is Aaron Alvarado, and me, Jacob Simmons, and we are Made for Another World. This is Episode 3, Gospel Clarity by Voddie Baucham. Voddie is a husband, father to 9, grandfather, former pastor, church planter, author, professor, and dean of the School of Divinity at African Christian University, and he's also an accomplished martial artist, and in 2019, he opened the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Zambia.
Wow. Dude's bringing the heat on all fronts.
Yeah, seriously. How do you do so much?
I don't know. I'm just thinking of the amount of time that would take.
Yeah.
Good for you, Voddie.
Yeah, well done.
That's impressive. Well, for a little context for this episode, in March of 2022, Voddie preached a sermon at the Shepherds Conference from John MacArthur's church in Sun Valley. From the sermon, Voddie tells us, we need gospel clarity. We need to confront wickedness. We need to recognize attacks on the gospel and on the God of the gospel, and we need to make the gospel clear. That's my assignment tonight. So, with that in mind, shall we start?
Let's go.
Clip 1.
As I survey the last few decades, I can remember how there was the recognition of a loss of the gospel. There was a recognition that the gospel had begun to be messed with and tinkered with. There was a recognition that things like the church growth movement and other movements like that were shying away from the gospel. And all of a sudden, in response to that, you had gospel everything in this attempt to recover the gospel and put the gospel at the center of everything. And then all of a sudden, that became a fad. The gospel became a fad, and there was gospel this and gospel that and gospel everything. Gospel bake sales. But interestingly enough, as gospel became a fad and attaching gospel to everything became a fad, the gospel was being lost again in the name of the gospel. And there were things that were called gospel because that was the fad, but they had no gospel in them whatsoever. And then fast forward, and gospel has become everything, which means it's become nothing. And then people start saying that things are the gospel that aren't the gospel. And all of a sudden, things that are implications of the gospel and maybe fruit of the gospel are being identified as the gospel.
It's a little bit scary, right? To think of how that kind of takes place, I guess. It's almost like it's like if you let your reaction to the gospel develop into its own gospel almost, like it's you forget that who's the real protagonist, like who of the gospel, like the Jesus is really what the gospel's about. And yeah, we know that and we say that, but especially I think he's talking more like kind of culturally, obviously. It's easy for that to become, because culturally and just humanly, like our focus is on ourselves, right? And so we take something that isn't something that's for us, but not about us, and we make it about us and for us, and that becomes very dangerous, right? Like that's very scary to have to be on that type of slope, and then especially when it becomes so, I guess, saturated. Here we are in the Bible Belt where you see gospel bake sales, like that's a real thing. Like that sounds really silly, but stuff like that, it happens all the time, and they're not all bad, right? They're not all wrong. But some of them are just painted with the gospel brush, but the painting isn't the gospel, right? And that's a very scary thing to think that is happening or could happen or has happened or any of those.
Yeah. On one hand, I love and appreciate the gospel-centered movement. This is how I I believe that God used that to open my eyes to the gospel. I was serving in a church and wasn't really sure what gospel-centered meant, and I heard people talking about gospel centrality, and I was like, what is this about? Essentially, I came to find out that a camp within that gospel-centered movement said, we believe you should preach the gospel every Sunday. And I was like, why? And then that clued me into, well, there's something important about the gospel that, and I was serving at a church, mind you, but seeing the importance and why it should be centered, I love that that's what the movement did. However, just like we're saying, that I feel like the pendulum swung too far in the other direction, and now you said everything has become gospel. So I'm thankful for it, right. But I guess with any movement, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
Okay, we swung too far. There's never any human movement that's going to be without fault and without just humanity in it. So I guess it makes sense that this has happened. But so I'm thankful for it, while also understanding that it's man kind of, since man is in it, it's going to have its bad things about it as well.
Yeah. Well, and like he called it a fad. And if you think, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but most movements or, a fad, whatever you want to call it, if we're talking about movements, whether it's in, Christianity or whatever, I feel like maybe they're usually started right, on something good, but then once it becomes popular or becomes what he calls a fad, then it's just slap the label on it, Right. And so there's so there is good to it, right? It wasn't just somebody was like, hey, let's start a gospel fad. There was probably, it just developed into that. And so, and that's what, just like you said, that's what's going to happen when man is involved, is that we're going to taint something that is good,
right.
And make us the winner.
Yeah.
But, good though.
Yeah.
All right.
Or are we confident in the gospel? Again, in 1 Corinthians 1, verses 20 to 25, where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are being saved, Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Do we have confidence in this? Do we really believe that the gospel is our greatest need? Do we really believe that it's the church's greatest need? Do we really believe that it is our nation's greatest need? Do we really believe that it is our world's greatest need? Do we really believe that? Or are we waiting for someone to ride in on a white horse who's not named Jesus? If we believe this, we will manifest that belief by preaching this gospel in which we have confidence.
He's getting down to it. I think what, speaking only for myself, I guess, there is a little bit of that. I don't know if it's like a selfish worry or a, something within that says, okay, there are more practical ways to grow people. There are more practical ways to grow the church that, I think if it's coupled with preaching the gospel, those things can be fine, but when it becomes let me soften up on the gospel so that, maybe it's a little more easy to hear, a little more easy to unpack, or maybe not even, maybe I think that I preached the gospel, but when it came to, expositing the text, it's really all legalistic. It's do these things, be these things, and then at the end have an altar call. And it's like, so I get what he's getting at by saying, like, ultimately it's pretty simple. Do we believe that the gospel will somewhat produce that fruit, or are we trying to say, well, yes, but let me take a little bit away from it, or let me do seeker sensitive, let me church at the movies, so on and so forth. Like, let me figure out ways that I can soften all of that. And so I appreciate that he's just getting down to it. Like, when he says, do we really believe that the gospel is our greatest need? Do we really believe that it's the church's greatest need? And I think that that's what, like, if we do really believe that, and I think, unfortunately, like, you go through, like, almost on waves of, like, oh, I believe that, and then, I know I should believe it, but I am functionally not necessarily believing it. But ultimately, what changes people, what changes a church, what at the end of the day, what would make a church most, maybe not successful in the world's eyes, but the most faithful in God's eyes, is this gospel. And so I like that it's let's cut out everything, all of these movements, everything that they've promoted. Let's cut everything down. Do you believe that the gospel is our greatest need? And so I appreciate that it's just like, it cuts to the chase. Here's the clarifying point that I'm getting at, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if this is what he was really getting at, but he hammers home the confidence in it a bunch. And like you're talking, when we talk about whether it's, seeker sensitive churches, or if you're, just slapping a theme on a whatever it is. I don't want to say this is the case every time, but I always feel like that's because you're lacking the confidence in the gospel, right? Like, we only, if you really, there's a difference between believing something and having confidence in something, right? Like, I can believe something but not have a whole lot of confidence in that. To have full confidence in the gospel, obviously, if you truly believe it, it isn't that difficult to have that confidence. But without that confidence, that's when you start to manipulate, right? Like, if I can believe something, but if I'm not confident in it, I may start to manipulate that a little bit. And so that's where I feel like that's kind of where that kind of comes from, I guess, is the lack of confidence. And that's a struggle, because we keep talking about, well, do we believe that it's the church's greatest need? Do we believe that's our greatest need? Well, yeah, I do, but also the gospel is unbelievable because it's so amazing. So it is difficult, right? Yeah. So there is a reality to the struggle of that, and then which also that falls into the confidence of it. It's like, well, yeah, I believe this, but this is so beyond me to understand. I lack confidence in that sometimes, right? And so, but that's where, I guess that's where I don't think that's where he was going necessarily on that, but that's what I keep hearing when I listen to that is the confidence in the gospel and the confidence in believing that it is our greatest need, the church's greatest need, so on. I like that, and I need to hear that.
Yeah. Well, it's what Martin Luther said of we need the gospel every day because we forget it every day. Like that. I think that proposes even a further challenge to someone who's going to teach or preach, in that you are also going to forget it. And so it's almost like a double challenge, in that you have to first believe it, you have to see your need for it, trust it, put all your eggs in that basket, and then try to preach in that way. And so I can imagine too that if someone has gotten personally removed from the gospel, then they would start to trust in some of these practical maybe seeker sensitive, maybe not, but maybe legalistic understanding of the text, even so. It's such a slippery slope, I think, with our sinful human nature. But so at the end of the day, hopefully we can always have some voice like this, some voice like a friend, some voice like our pastor, or someone who can say, don't forget it. Like Martin Luther, you need it every day because you forget it every day. Stop, think, consider it, and if you need to, come back. If you need to, stop running. Like some sort of voice that says that I so thankful for something like technology in regard to, like, we get to hear this. We weren't there for it, but we still get to hear him talk about it and say, hey, it's over here. Like I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's good. All right. Next clip.
I grew up not far from here. It's always interesting and ironic when I have conversations with people like this because they make assumptions about me. I'm a Los Angelino. Kind of. Born at USC Medical Center. Raised in South Central Los Angeles. Raised by a single teenage Buddhist mother. Raised po. Not poor. We couldn't afford the O and the R. We was just po. Raised being nervous and afraid of the Rampart Division, the LAPD. Raised by a single teenage Buddhist mother, never heard the gospel until I went to university. Raised without my father, who left us when I was just a couple of years old. Raised in a drug-infested and gang-infested environment. Raised in a situation that people would refer to as oppressed. And my greatest need was met. Not when somebody delivered me from some kind of human oppression, but when somebody shared the gospel of Jesus Christ and delivered me from the oppression of sin.
Man, that is a timely message, right? I mean, I feel like the word oppression is used far too frequently. Now, don't get me wrong, there are oppressions happening. Right. I get it. But it's a little loose sometimes. But I love how he lays out. That dude was in oppressed environment, right? I mean, that's about as, I don't want to say it's as low as it gets, but that's a tough upbringing, man. Yeah. And to say that his greatest need was, I don't remember how he phrased it, but the oppression from sin was far greater than the oppression of man. And that, I feel like that's probably hard to recognize sometimes. I mean, like, not in general, but just like day to day, like if you're feeling the oppressions of man, it's apparent. But the oppression of sin isn't always so apparent, right? And so it's easy to think that, oh, these things are much worse, when really pale in comparison to the greatness, the graveness of the oppression of sin. And we may have talked about this before, I don't remember, but it's like if you have a house fire, right? And then the firemen, they go to the house, and I'm not a fireman, I don't know how this works, but the lead fireman goes, let's go do this. But he doesn't go in and say, let's go save the pillows. Like, no, save the house. Like, let's save the house. Don't worry about the lampshade. Don't worry about if we save those two, fine. That's great. But that's not the biggest issue here. The biggest issue here is that these people are about to lose their entire house. And that's kind of how this is. Like, yes, do we just ignore worldly oppressions? No, absolutely not. But next to the oppression of sin, what does it matter? Like, what does it matter if you have your pillows but your house burns down?
Right.
That's not gonna. It might help a little bit, I guess, if you're sleeping on the street. But but you've got to see that, and it's hard, especially if you're of the world. Like, then you're definitely that's a real thick blind right there, right? Like, you're not going to see that. But to know that, however heavy those oppressions may seem, the oppression of sin is so far worse. And I just complained about oppression being used a lot, and I just said it like 700 times. But that's just a really good. It's timely. It's a good point. It's a good reminder. And the dude has lived it. He's lived it out, and so that's awesome.
I actually feel oppressed by how much you use the word oppressed. Honestly, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head with that one, because I think that, okay, there are, I guess it has to be a balance, right? So, if there are not like medical missionaries out on the field, medically taking care of people, then they will die, and then they will not be able to hear. And so you need both, right? Like, you need and then maybe perhaps if you are someone that came from a homeless community, maybe it meant nothing if someone just shared the gospel with you. But if they gave you a warm blanket and a cup of coffee, and then they did it, like, maybe that opens that door. And so maybe there's a balance to strike. But what's hard is I've seen it done where it's the only focus is the outreach, right? Like, the only focus is the going to this community to build a church. Well, you're not talking to anyone. You're not really building a relationship or even explaining what the gospel is to anyone. You're just like, yeah, I went on a mission trip to, build a church, or I went on a mission trip to, do this and that to help with hurricane relief or anything like that. But if so I say that to what I've seen is that there are some that when they show up, they're like, well, what am I trying to say? It can become a part of a self-assurance in a legalistic fashion of, I did a good deed, right? But not to say that it's not a good deed. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think that people should absolutely do that. More people should do it. But with go together take the gospel with you to those places, and I get that not everyone has the gift of sharing the gospel. I certainly don't. Jonah didn't seem like he did either. I think that regardless of our gift, the call is still the same. Yes, take a blanket. Yes, build a church, but also share the offer of the free gift of grace that God has given, because that is far more important. So both.
Yeah.
But one is heavier, weightier.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For sure. Even Jesus, though, I mean, he didn't, when the oppression, I'm going to say it again, the oppression, of leprosy, people came to Jesus and wanted to be healed. He didn't say, don't worry about that. Just believe in me. Hey, Jesus, my son is dying. Just let him die, dude. Just follow me. No, let me heal. Let me take care of this oppression and follow me, right? So even Jesus, there was a balance. It wasn't just none of these things matter, only eternity matters. No, stuff here matters too. And that's, I feel like you could come across as like a jerk, right? Like, if you're just like, if that's all you care about is just the gospel, we don't care about anything else, or the other way around. So there definitely needs to be a good balance on that for sure. Yeah.
Side note, everyone that Jesus physically healed, did he also save them?
Ooh. Is there an answer
I
that
don't
people
know.
know?
I'm asking you.
I want to say maybe, just off the top of my head.
That's committal.
It's an oppressive question.
Touche.
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I was
Seems
looking
like
for
maybe.
guidance and advice and counsel.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Somebody listening right
That's
now.
a good
is like,
question, though. Yeah.
I know the answer.
Somebody
Yeah.
studied this. And they're like, you idiots.
Yeah.
You're correct. Yeah. Idiots.
Got that right.
All right. Last clip.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
When people say, no, our problem is this, our problem is that, we say, no. Our problem is that God created the world. And God created man, and he put man in the garden to keep the garden. And he gave the man a command. And he held that man to perfect, perpetual obedience to that command. And he promised him life if he kept it, and death if he didn't. And he didn't keep it. He ate. And because he ate, because of that one man, sin entered the world, and death through sin. And everyone born from that man through ordinary generation inherited that man's sin nature. And because of that sin nature, sins proceed from it. And our world is broken because of that sin. And we stand guilty before a holy and righteous God. And we know that he's holy, and we know that he's righteous, and we crave justice. But the problem is that if God gives us justice, we all die. And so that God, in his goodness and in his mercy, sent forth his son, who was not born of ordinary generation, but was born of a virgin. Yes, the virgin birth matters. Why? Because if he's born of ordinary generation, he's born in sin. But because he's not born of ordinary generation, he's not born in sin. He's clean of sin. His record is clean. And he keeps his record clean. And he obeys God's law. And because he's fully God and fully man, he obeys the law of God on our behalf in his active obedience. And then in his passive obedience, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. All we like sheep had gone astray. Each of us had turned to his own way, but God laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And Christ died for sin once for all, the just for the unjust. And God imputes our sinfulness to him. And he nails our sinfulness to the tree. And Christ dies and raises again on the third day for our justification. And there's another imputation. The righteousness of Christ is actually imputed to us so that God can be both just and the justifier of the one who places faith in Jesus Christ, so that all those who come to Christ may enter in, so that all those who place faith in Christ might be saved, but not only saved, but sanctified, because he's the firstborn of many brethren. We're justified and we're adopted into the family of God, and we're sanctified. And as his children, we begin to bear the family resemblance, and we're further sanctified throughout this life by the very same gospel that saves us, until one day when it's all said and done, we're not just saved from the penalty of sin. We're not just saved from the power of sin, but one day we're glorified and saved from the very presence of sin. That's the gospel that we preach. That's the gospel that we need. And that's the gospel that's more than enough.
Cut.
It's more than enough. There you go.
End it there. Man. You ever feel like I could have said that in the same way?
Not with him, no.
There's no way, man. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much to take apart here. So I don't think we'll get to all of it, but one, I think, important distinction that he makes kind of at the very beginning, he talks about sins nature. So he says, sins, because of that sin nature, sins proceed from that nature. And I think that that's a really helpful distinction. We've talked about it a couple of times, I think, in Desiring God, but like it's not that we are good people who do bad things. It's that we have this sinful, which is evil, bad nature within us that causes us to do bad things. And so it's not that we have, it's not that we can stop doing bad things and we'll be okay. It's that we have no way of stopping those bad things because of what's in us, right? And so I think that's an extremely important distinction in today's day and age, because I'm sure you've heard it too of the, you know, the argument of, well, you know, I don't want to oversimplify or undersimplify. I don't want to do anything, but like when people say, you know, Jesus died for my sins, it's like, well, yes, but I wish that there was more unpacked there, generally speaking. I try not to butt into some of those conversations, but what am I saying? Because there's a sense in which it's like a naive, well, he died for all the things that I've done wrong, as opposed to, no, he died because I have no way of ever doing anything right. Yeah. He died not only for those things that I've done wrong, and he was punished for them, but he's also punished for the very heart that dwells within me that's dead. It's those sins proceed from that evil, wicked, sinful heart, and he died for that as well. And so I maybe it's kind of nitpicky now that I say it out loud, but I thought that was a really good distinction that he made, and I thought that was helpful language that he used. And then secondly, the fact that he, generally speaking, you hear a gospel presentation, you hear, you know, God, man, Christ's response, and which is wonderful. It's beautiful. But one thing that I really love with Voddie, as I've listened to him, he likes to bring in, like you said, and there's another imputation. There's a couple of things that he brings in. So salvation, but then he mentioned sanctification and adoption, right? So he's bringing in all these other aspects that we don't necessarily, in oversimplifying the gospel, we don't think too much about these random pieces. And so I appreciate that he adds all those in there, because if you think about, you know, maybe I was saved, but how can I be sanctified if I'm not, I don't know, if I'm despairing over my own sinfulness, if I'm looking too inward? A great gospel balm to that is to say, well, you're not your own. Like, you've been adopted. You don't belong to you. You don't belong to King Sin. You don't belong to Satan any longer. You belong to Christ. Like, he's adopted you in. You're part of the family. And so I just love that there's, it widens the scope, I guess, a bit on the gospel, and says, here's another contour of it. Here's another piece of it that we can think about. That's wonderful. That's what's the opposite of disheartening? Heartening?
Heartening.
Is that a word, though?
I don't know.
Encouraging?
Encouraging.
But I said that one. Heartening. We'll go for it.
I like it. I understand it. I like how he... were you done? Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't want to dishearten you. I didn't
want to impress me again.
But he kind of, I guess, not bring it full circle, but kind of to previous points. I don't know if he made or I made, either way, but kind of like the sin beneath the sin, right? Like he's talking about the problem isn't our problems. Our problem is the sin in our problems, which is kind of like we were saying, his greatest need was freedom from the oppression of sin, not from the oppression of man. And we have to recognize that there is that sin beneath the sin, however you want to phrase that. Like, you can't just mow over the weeds, right? Like, I can have a whole yard full of weeds and I can just mow them down. Hey, it looks pretty good. But then they're going to keep growing back up. Matter of fact, they're probably going to spread, right? Like, I got to get to the root of the problem. I got to dig those suckers out and get them out so I can have a nice yard. You've got to get to the root of the issue. And like you were saying, it's just our sin nature. But he also talks about our how we crave justice, right? And I think part of that craving for justice in our sin nature, we're selfish, and so we want to blame others. So it's like, oh, I'm oppressed, even though I know I have this own sin nature. I need to focus on somebody else's sin nature, because we do have that desire to see and have justice, which isn't wrong in itself, but without the gospel lens, it's pointless, right? We're just mowing over the weeds. And without the gospel, we're pointless, like we're dead. We are those weeds. But with the gospel, justice is been served to Christ, and the way he laid that out is more beautiful than I'm even going to try to say it again right now. But so good. There's the sin beneath the sin. Our sin is greater than man.
Yeah.
So good.
I do like too. So he mentioned that the world is broken because of our sin. So why there is such thing as a Rampart division of the LAPD, why there is the fact of the matter that there is a single mom anywhere in this world, that like why the world is broken in that way and in such a way, or such all of these ways, is because of sin, right? Like it's not only is it me that sinned and I'm impacted by my own sin, my sin impacts those around me. My sin impacts my kids, my wife, my family, so on and so forth. And I mean, it's somewhat. Well, it's not somewhat. It's absolutely heartbreaking that that's true. If God were not redemptive, if He didn't redeem lives and situations, and if He didn't pay for those sins Himself, I mean, it would be all of the countless ways I can count, all the countless ways I can't count, that in any of our lives would be completely shipwrecked, or I would have died 10 years ago because of this thing, or, you know, like any of those things happening, or rather any of those things not happening is all God's grace, and any of those things happening is all God's grace. Like He's working for. And I think this is where the key comes in, right? Like it's for His glory. It's not that my image of being a good guy is preserved. It's that God's glory is seen. And so if my image is lost because of any one of the sins that I've committed ever or will commit in the future, makes me to look like a bad guy, that might happen. You know, like that might be true. I might burn relationships with anyone in my life, but at the end of the day, this whole world is about God's glory, and so yeah, it's broken because of our sin, but it will be redeemed somehow. Yeah. I don't know what that looks like. I can't even comprehend what I just said, let alone what that even looks like. You know, but I appreciate that's brought up, and it says that. Like we have that craving, that longing for things to be made right, because the world is broken. Like we see that it's wrong. We see that the world needs justice. And then he says, but we don't want justice, really. Not really. Because we all die.
Yeah.
And I was thankful.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
Yep. If you're listening to this podcast or watching or whatever, go watch that full sermon, or is that a sermon from him? Did you call that? Is that what it is?
It was for a conference. So is that a maybe not a Lord's Day, Sunday sermon, but
basically a sermon though. Either way, gospel clarity, Voddie Baucham.
Yeah,
listen, it's good. Whole thing.
Clarity. You talked about the lenses. Look at that, man.
Look at that.
Perfect.
Nice.
Anything else you've got?
I don't think so. No.
I thought you said you wanted to add to Voddie and make what he said
a
little more clear, a little better.
He leaves a lot to be wanted, but I'll save that for the next time around. Yeah.
Okay, cool. To close out our time with Voddie, we'll read this comment posted on this video by Folowaso Aribisala. He writes, I've listened to this many times, and my understanding of the gospel deepens with every sequence. The gospel truly is never outdated. It renews my mind every time. Tune in next time as we read snippets from a book written by a guy. Until then, this has been Aaron Alvarado and me, Jacob Simmons, and we are made for another world. They have people that can help you with your posture, like chiropractors. They charge a posture fee.
Oh my gosh. I'm just gonna hunch down like this.
Check 1, 2. I didn't do my hair. I didn't wear a hat. Hello and welcome. Why are you laughing already? Well, it's closed tonight. Nope. I didn't fix that. Okay. The gospel truly never... To that we can say amen.
Amen.
Until then. Until when?
We did it.
We did it.